Hello and welcome back to another wonderful episode of Wrenches, Gadgets, and Hacks. It's been a while, so let me just bring you up to speed. What we do on this podcast is we dive into the dynamic intersection of architecture, engineering, construction, and operations. That's the owner, the money, in case you're not sure. We talk about cutting edge technologies. We try to keep it to 30 minutes. We unravel the tools, the technologies, and most importantly, the time saving hacks, hence the name, that reshapes the landscape of the industry and the hobbies alike. We like to play outside of the work hours. And whether you're a professional in the AECO, an enthusiast, or someone just curious about the future, join us on this journey. And as always, I have with me my guest host, the Ender 3 V2 Neo to my A1 Mini, the iPhone to my Pixel, and of course the AutoCAD to my Revit, John Pearson.
How's it going? Oh, I love that introduction. That's awesome.
I thought you might like that, and that's why I
You have
kept
an
it.
A1 Mini, huh?
I
I
love
forgot
it.
about that. Man, I want a bamboo lab so bad. The
Yeah,
3D printers for people listening, but man,
yes,
I forgot about that till the intro.
I absolutely love it, and I think this Black Friday or Boxing Day, as we have up here in Canada, I'm going to get the full size A1 to
Very
have as
cool.
well. Because for most things, the small print plane is good, but occasionally you need something bigger. And I have the
Yep,
4 spool already, so I don't need to get that. So I can probably get a pretty good
need the
deal.
other part. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. Awesome.
Yes.
How
So
you been?
I've been good. It's been a while, right? The last episode we did was April Fools, which
Yep,
was kind of a joke, but kind of not. We got on there, we introduced the new series, The Great Unknown, and basically AI took our podcasting jobs.
there you go.
And then we just let, I know the name of it.
Notebook
Uh,
LM?
Thank you very much. Do the podcast for us. And then, of course, we came in after and we sort of explained it, but it's been 6, 7 months. And I thought it would be good if we came back and sort of finished out the series. We like to do it in groups of six. And with the topic of the great unknown, I know I've been spending a lot of time in that time since we've been away I'm doing air quotes for those of you that aren't watching the video, vibe coding, which essentially means coding with the assistance of AI. We talk a lot about AI on this podcast, and I thought that was a good place to start. So I thought we could bring the idea of vibe coding and just in general where coding for those that aren't coding experts is going for the last 5 episodes of this series. So, what do you think, John? What are your thoughts on this particular episode? We talk about what is vibe coding, with or without the air quotes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, this whole concept of vibe coding's very interesting to me. So like having been in the industry a while now, right? We've seen things like no code even be something people talked about a lot in previous years to where you're building apps with things like Airtable and things like that, basically. So no code, low code slash no code.
Yeah.
So vibe coding is just like this new kind of phrase that everyone's throwing out. And I think at first, didn't it? It kind of started out like almost like as like a talking down about it. That's the vibe I got about
Hmm.
vibe coding, like
Yep.
on Twitter and LinkedIn. Is it's like, oh, you're just there for the vibes and you're making it work. But it's kind of started to be like a badge of honor for some people building tools because they're like, I vibe coded this weekend and look at it, and it's this whole thing that they just built, which is wild to me. So it's interesting, and I guess like I don't even know what a like an actual definition of it is, but in general, it's people creating things with AI just helping them, right?
Yeah.
I
That
just
that's
asked AI to define it.
that's kind of my understanding of what it is too. And I have one of those badges, that I've made stuff with the AI vibe coding, if you will. And I certainly find that there is still some people out there, as there always will be, and they're usually people that are real coders, and
Yeah.
they sort of look. I don't even know if look down on vibe coding is what they do, but for those that don't know anything about coding and use vibe coding to create something, sometimes the thing we're hearing now is AI slop is the term that
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lot now. So something that in theory works, you know, we're not testing it and we're not QAing it. I asked an LLM to make something and it did. Perfect. Next.
Yeah. Ship
Um,
it.
yeah. So I can see how that becomes an issue for sure. And it's no different really than when we were using low code or no code. And putting a bunch of nodes together in things like Dynamo or N8N or all those different options out there to do that, where we were basically prototyping. We were using our limited means, and by our I mean mine, limited means to get something down and say, hey, this works. And then if we wanted to take it further, we could. But I
Yeah.
think what some people are finding with the vibe code mentality, especially if you look at the influencers out there, it's like, hey, you can use Bolt or Lovable or whatever it is, and you can create a viable product and be a millionaire by the weekend. I think that's probably a stretch, but to help
Yeah.
someone prototype, it's absolutely something that can do that.
It's really
But
cool for that.
yeah, there's always a but. And that'll be another episode, but there's always a but.
Yeah. That's the part that normally someone's talking about something, and then the part after the but's what you really care about. Yeah, there's actually so like the vibe coding stuff too. So I found an app that I really like recently in the last 2 months for just writing things down. So like a note app, but also a task management and
Okay.
calendar integration. It's called Twos, so TWOS,
Okay.
Twos app, and it's a place to write things down. It's an app that's been available for quite a while, and over the last probably 2, 3 months, the developer they've been doing live streams where they're vibe coding version 2 of the app, and he's in Cursor and just asking it to change how the UI looks and letting these platforms rewrite it for him, which has been really interesting, but also as a new user of the app who kind of like fell in love with the app pretty quickly, seeing how it's starting to change a little has worried me a little actually, because I really like the interface and the interactions that they designed themselves over the last like I think the app's been around for like 5, 6 years, maybe longer. But following their live streams and the beta version of the app or alpha version actually that they're vibe coding has caused me as a current user to be a little worried about the next one because of some of the decisions that are being made. So it's kind of an interesting thing too. But it's funny because they're actual developers and they're embracing this vibe coding thing to make the new version, which I found kind of interesting too. Yeah, and there's a lot of different platforms to do these things as well, of course, right?
Yeah, there's tons of ways out there to do it, and there only seems to be more every day. And
Yeah,
I think, or at least the part that I find interesting about that is I wonder what they get from that. Obviously, vibe coding is a buzzword now, so doing live streams and talking about that, they're getting new people involved in place, but at the cost of an actual revenue stream that's already working and current users, that
yeah,
might be a bit, I don't know, harsh. I think maybe the idea would be better if you're whatever the next threes, the next product they're going to do. That would be a
yeah.
great way to get people involved to bring it into place, as opposed to messing with something that people already know and love.
That's very true. Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, in terms of platforms too, like the vibe coding thing is interesting to me because as someone who knows some development, I like using these platforms to learn as well. So I'll write code and then I'll ask it what's a better way to do this, you know? And that's been huge for me for learning, which is really cool too. Yeah, it's and then watching everything you're doing is pretty cool too. I mean, you have a whole vibe coded Dynamo package now.
Yes, which was an adventure. Up until that moment, all of my vibe coding had been with, JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and it had been pretty successful because there is a wealth of knowledge on the internet, especially older internet. And the reason why I say older internet is because all of these LLMs are only sort of smart up to a certain cutoff date, so the end of 2024. But what you do to make a fairly simple web-based product hasn't changed for 10 years. So there's a ton of knowledge out there. And so it's really easy for these platforms, whether it's Cursor or Windsurf or just your LLM of choice, to be able to create something and it be pretty decent. But with the Dynaflex, shameless plug, it was C sharp. And I had done a little bit of C sharp in 2018, but hadn't touched it since. And so I was really sort of worried about how I would be able to handle it. And for me, I used Claude, and I think it did a pretty good job, but I had less knowledge. And with the JavaScript and things like that, I could tell, I could look at the code, I'd know if there was thing was wrong, and I would know enough backstory or not backdoor. I know enough stuff about it
To
that if
kind
there's
of
something
interrogate it.
blaringly wrong, yeah, correct, I could do a little general Q&A But with the C sharp part, it was a little tougher.
Yeah.
So a lot more trial and error. And that's the other thing about vibe coding. Again, this will be a whole episode, but the trial and error. And if you don't know what you don't know, you could spend days going down a rabbit hole that there's no end because it's hallucination or it's wrong or it's a loop. The loops are the worst.
Yep, for sure. That back and forth, like testing it too is like so huge. So like I've just like on a personal level, I was playing around with like making web apps too. I was asking it to make like a workout plan with actual GIFs of the workouts. That was like an app idea I had. Because I don't know if anyone's ever looked at other apps or anything for like working out or anything like that. But it's always like it describes the workout or it shows you like a 10-minute video of how to do the workout. And I was like, I just want like a GIF showing how you, and someone will probably steal this idea now, but I just want like a GIF of it showing like the form and how to do the workout and call it good because I only have so much time, right? And it was so confident. I didn't even remember. I think I was trying Lovable to try it out. And I described it and it's like, all right, here you go. And it like was finding random GIFs from like Tinner or
Yeah, yeah,
Jiffy.
another one you mean. Yep.
And they're like just random workouts like that weren't working. So it was very confident in what it gave me, but it's like, yeah, do this Romanian deadlift, and then it's like some other workout. So I was like, it's close, but there's still a lot of fine tuning to be had for sure. So I thought that was interesting, is sometimes how confident it is, and if you're not paying enough attention, you think it's good to go sometimes. And
Yeah,
that's like a really basic example of like you can obviously tell if it's doing the wrong workout in that case, but sometimes it might be very confident, but there's something just slightly off about it and you don't realize, which is interesting too.
yep. And that's a good example that they will come in there very confident. And a lot of the times it's sort of, I've heard this in a couple other podcasts and just people talking in general, it gets you that first 80% very quickly.
Yeah,
But that last 20% is painful. And that's a lot. That last 5% is a Everest to get up to get that last 5% to make it,
for sure.
actually viable and to work. And a quick example about, something that I'm currently vibe coding is it's an actual project. So there's, 7 different code bases and there's, thousands of lines of code. And one of the things that was catching up was one lowercase b instead of capital B
Oh
in
well.
7,000 lines of code. And it took a long time for it to find that. And it did find it, but you have to know what to do. And I also find that just like us humans before a morning coffee, that if you're a ways into a chat, the answer you'll get to a question isn't the same as if it's a fresh chat.
Yeah,
It
that's
knows
very
to
true
think.
context.
And so sometimes when you're stuck asking it the same question, but in a brand new context, brand new environment, it goes, oh, yeah, of course, it's easy. It's this. Why didn't you know that? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you didn't know that either. But
Yeah. One of my favorite things would be like, no, that's not right. Just telling it like, come on now. And it's like, you're correct. And like in the case of like Cursor, I don't know if anyone out there's used Cursor, but it's like has this whole chat window and edits files for you. You'll tell it, no, that's not right. And you start seeing it delete all the files it made. And it's just like doing all this stuff to your code base. So like another tip on that one is like make sure you're using like GitHub or some kind of version control for your code. Because if you start letting these things touch your code, you want a history of that as well. That way you can revert back if you do something like terrible as well.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I played with Cursor and Windsurfer, and I thought they were pretty cool. But my level of knowledge of code wasn't such that I was comfortable with the fact that I say, okay, do that, and then it rewrites the entire code base. And if I wasn't connected to a
Yeah.
Git of some sort, I did notice when I first started working with Cursor, and I forgot what it's called now, but you had two options. So you had basically the chat, which was like an LLM window when you worked on that, and it was the one that replaced all your code, and it basically worked as if you're like me, you don't know code. But then there was something, I'm going to say conversation, there's a different name for it, where it was meant if you were a coder, where it would be more specific and show you sort of line by line and you could
Oh
review it
yeah.
and get in place. And there's two different ways to use it. And I think that's where you find the actual coders coming around to vibe coding, is that it becomes a tool that when they can control it, it can do all the mundane stuff, which is exactly what it's intended for, all the boilerplate stuff, all the easy stuff, and it can review it. Whereas as of somebody that doesn't know the code, they're saying, okay, I can change all of this. Here, look how great and how quick I did it. Do you want it to do it? Come on, hit yes, hit yes, hit yes.
Yeah.
And then you hit the button, you're like, well, now nothing works.
Yeah. And then like you have GitHub open, it tells you 15 files modified, but you thought it was going to modify one. That's one of my the in product in context stuff is what I've found really cool with all this vibe coding stuff. So like if you're in Visual Studio like proper or code, having it right there, like predicting something that might be what you want to do, like scaffolding out this whole class or something like that. That's been huge. That's like been really cool to have as like a helping hand that I've seen in Visual Studio. Sometimes with like the Revit API, for instance, though, it's searching GitHub, like PyRevit's repos and Dynamo's repos and all these repos, and you like do like wall dot, and it's like some other like far off like solution someone built to extract all the faces from a wall. And I'm like, I just wanted to get the wall's height, something like that. So that's kind of interesting too, is it'll find something and just throw it at you. And that won't be the suggestion you necessarily wanted. So I've also found that kind of interesting. I've always liked suggestions like that as well. I think, and I stole this example from someone, but Gmail, you're writing an email and you're saying, hey, how's it going, Carl? Do you want to? And then it's all catch up and go get tacos, something like that. Your email predicts something next. I've always really appreciated that function like in Gmail, and I think that's how I approach these tools is I expect an interaction like that from them as well, to where it's makes more sense and it's just kind of there subtly. That's what I've always liked a lot too, instead of just do it all for me. Because in Gmail too, you can say write an email for me. It might not sound like you though, but having it refine an email that you already wrote or help participate in that authoring is really cool. So that's like kind of the way I've liked to look at these things too.
Well, and that's a good way to look at it, and that's where we as humans get stuck is that it's so easy if I just ask AI to do it. And AI will
Yeah,
do it, but it won't be the same as if you do it and ask AI to help.
yeah.
You get a different outcome. And I'm going to bring up a sore spot for some people, but Clippy was so ahead of its time.
Oh
That's
man,
that's really what we're into now, and I wouldn't be surprised if they bring it back because
yeah.
what it did and how we should interact with AI now is how Clippy was.
Yeah, all this stuff just being right there waiting to help you out is really pretty neat. And that's like one thing like I pay attention to on a lot of what people are adding to things. So like even and I know a lot of people don't use Twitter anymore, but even like on Twitter, on every tweet or X it's called now, there's a little it's called Grok, that's their AI. There's a little Grok explain this tweet to me thing like on every tweet. And it's really neat for if you want to research something. So like if someone makes an announcement, and a personal example here is right now I live in New Mexico and we have a balloon fiesta every year where hot air balloons fly and there's a ton of them. It's very weather dependent though. So on Twitter yesterday, I went to one of the tweets from Balloon Fiesta and I asked Grok, how does the weather look today for this? Is there any indication that it might be canceled? And it's researching and digging through all these different posts and kind of doing that. So like AI being a helping hand's so cool. And with vibe coding, I think that's like a really neat side effect of it is like you said, Carl, even like real coders, they might be using some of these vibe coding kind of things just differently. They're not asking it to write the whole app for you. They're asking for help along the way, which is really cool. Yeah, it's an interesting world.
Absolutely. And it's changed so much from just the beginning of the year, what was in there. And I think that's one of the key parts is that it's all in how you think about it. And if you think about it as that helping hand, as something to help you out, something to learn from as you're using it, having it explain why it's doing things, I think you'll get a lot more out of it. Are you going to be frustrated at times? Absolutely. But if you're doing some of those things that you see out there on the World Wide Web where it's like, hey, just take this app, spend $30 a month, click a button, and you'll be a bajillionaire because you're selling
Yeah, yeah,
apps and stuff, maybe not necessarily true, especially if there's no Q&A, no sort of oversight. And that's the part where it's easy to get drawn in to be able to to do something and have it create something, especially that
Right.
first 80%, which usually is the part that looks good, not so much the part that makes it
Okay.
function good, that makes it a little hard to get through.
For sure. That like reminds me too, like so previously in a previous job, I built Revit plugins, and the easier part was building the Revit plugin. The hardest part was doing the licensing. So building out the licensing infrastructure as well. So even without vibe coding, figuring out how to license apps and make it to where it floats and all that was like really hard. With vibe coding too, I've seen a lot of posts and threads and news articles about people who vibe coded apps and they share credentials accidentally or something. So all of a sudden you have like this AWS bill that's super expensive because you shared your credentials and like other people are using them, or you shared your OpenAI key or something like that by accident. So it's a it's definitely some hard lessons learned for people too, I think, which is kind of crazy. So something to keep in mind if you're playing with it too. It is nuts though that pretty quickly someone can have an idea for an app and have something that's working pretty quickly.
Yep.
Crazy.
Well, and I think that the idea and sort of the wording that people need to use, and I need to follow this my own self, is the idea of prototyping, getting something together that works, and if you're trying to go down the road of, you know, a viable product that where you sell, you always have to think about the licensings. You have to make sure that you're not revealing things about you or your customers or clients that you
Oh
shouldn't
yeah.
be. There's a lot of things that go in there, so it can be a very scary world going down that road. Let's finish the statement. But there's the other things that come in with vibe coding, and it's not just using an LLM or something like Cursor or that, but it's all these other technologies like AI agents is a hot topic now. The MCP, the model context protocol, where you can let your LLM have control over certain things, and that was also sort of sold to us as this. Oh, look, now you're whatever, Claude or ChatGPT can now control your computer and do all of these things. But if you look at it and examine some of the workflows, what it's doing is you're giving your computer the right to go to Zapier or one of those
Yeah.
things that you've been using for years. So it's not doing the automation. It's able to, tie the two buttons together. Not saying that it can't, but we're still
Yeah.
using those low code and no code things that we've used for years. We're just able to tie those things together, and we're able to give the control to someone that has, less experience. To me, it's like the person that's the the coach, those that can do, those that can't teach, or in my case, coach. But the idea is the same. You still have to have a general understanding about what you're doing. Maybe you don't know all the ins and outs of how you make the product come to life, but you know what the users might want. You're a more rounded individual, and that knowledge is going to make it better than if you just tell the AI to do this. And again, whether you're doing that through AI agents or using MPC or whatever it might, MCP, or whatever it might be to bring into place. So you're still going to always need that human in there to bring to place, or at least you should always have
Yeah.
that human interaction in there. And when you make that first mistake, or you spend a week going down a hole that there's nothing there, it's a dead end. You start to learn these things, and that's the problem. If you're, I guess, not the problem, the benefit, if you do it enough to be able to remember these mishaps. Back in my Revit training days, that's what I would always say is when someone made a mistake during a exercise, share it with the class because you learn more from running into that
Yeah.
roadblock as opposed to just blindly going through the steps and having it work out because it doesn't stick. But when you go down a road and you run into that roadblock, you tend to remember what you did, just like the old school writing notes down. It's the action
Yeah.
that leads to that memory.
That's a really interesting point. Is like even as you're vibe coding something, maybe going back and forth and trying, and it's a frustrating part, right? Trial and error, but you are learning along the way. That's like a really cool thing that you're forced to do almost at the same time. Like thinking of classes like we've taught, like at AU and stuff, like sometimes something doesn't go the way planned, but if you sit there and dissect it, I've received feedback from people in the audience that that was the best parts of classes is admitting that a mistake happened and figuring it out in front of everyone. As a presenter, that's a stressful time, if you're sitting there figuring something out, but it's super insightful. And I think that's another thing that I think's like a pro for vibe coding is going back and forth, testing, seeing what works, what doesn't, and it pushes you into that process faster because if you're trying to properly develop something, it takes you a while to get that first pass to actually test. And with this, it lets you start testing right away and finding holes, which is pretty neat, actually.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I like about it. And I think one of the things that we'll cover when we go forward in these upcoming episodes where we dive a little deeper into, the good, the bad, and the reality of what vibe coding actually is, a little deeper into what you can do, what's worked, what's not worked, how to use some of these tools, what are some of the tools.
Yeah.
So I think all of that is valuable to learn. And the idea to use it is, not only a prototyping environment, just similar to how you might use something like Dynamo, but also to understand that there's going to be shortcomings, there's going to be downfalls. It'd be good to have, someone take a look at it or, move forward with it. It's never going to be perfect. Even if it tells you it's perfect, it's not going to be.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think with that, I think that's a great place to, as I like to say, bring the plane in for a landing. Did you have any closing comments before we wrap up for the episode?
Oh, I mean, this episode was what is vibe coding, right? So, like, just asking AI to define it for us too. It just says it's kind of like a relaxed, intuitive, creative state of coding, hacking together something. So, I think that's a takeaway for everyone. I'd be curious who all's been playing with that, like actually coding up stuff. There's a lot of options out there to even try anymore. Most people have access to something to give it a shot. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. And I'd be curious, like, of any that people use that are vibe coded, any projects potentially. I'm always curious, like, where it goes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, for our tens and tens of listeners out there, be sure to leave comments wherever you hear about this to let us know what your experiments with Vibe Code have been like, as you in the upcoming episodes, the good, the bad, the reality, and see what's going on. But I think to finish up with what John mentioned, one of the things that I've had success with is that when I'm trying to do something with AI, is to ask AI about what I'm about to do. And have it tell me how to do it. And I don't mean how to create the code or how to whatever, but how to structure the prompt that I'm going to ask it. Because
Oh
different
yeah,
LLMs, different things have different responses, different ways to work. And like that lowercase versus uppercase, just the way that they like to ingest information, if you do it that way, you're going to get a better output. So that's my little take home tip for the episode.
really good tip for sure.
All right. And with that, I will finally bring the plane in. I want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Wrenches, Gadgets, and Hacks, where we explore the tools, technologies, and time-saving hacks that are shaping the future. And by hacks, I definitely mean hacks. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, button down here somewhere. Stay tuned for more insights into the exciting world of AECO and technology. Until next time, keep building, innovating, and exploring the possibilities.